Hello everyone. Today we are going to see about electrical and chemical synapses. In this presentation, we will be studying what is a neuron and a synapse, physiological classification of synapse, and comparison between electrical and chemical synapses. So, let's talk about neuron. As we know, neuron or the nerve cell, which is the fundamental unit of the brain and the nervous system. These cells are specialized to receive, integrate, and transmit information. So, talking about the parts, the major parts include soma, axon, and dendrites. Soma, or cell body, of a neuron contains the nucleus and other structures common to living cells. Axon of a neuron is a singular fiber that carries information away from the soma to the synaptic sites of other neurons, muscles, or glands. Myelin sheath. Myelin sheath of a neuron consists of fat-containing cells that insulate the axon from electrical activity. The gap formed between these myelin sheath cells along the axon are called node of Ranvier. The dendrites of a neuron are its many short branching fibers extending from the cell body, which is the soma. So here in this diagram, we could see the dendrites are present over the cell body, nucleus inside the cell body, and axon is the largest projection coming out of the cell, which is enclosed by myelin sheath made up of Schwann cells, and the gap between these myelin cells are called the node of Ranvier. These axons ends as a region called axon terminal. Synapses. The synapse is the point of connection between two neurons or between a neuron and a muscle or gland. Electric chemical communication between neurons take place at these junctions. These synapses consist of three elements. One, the presynaptic membrane, which is found by the terminal button of an axon. Two, the postsynaptic membrane, which is composed of segment of dendrites or cell body. And three, the space between these two structures, which are called the synaptic cleft. In this diagram, we can see the action potential, which is present in the presynaptic cell, is communicated or transmitted to the postsynaptic cell via the synapse. So, these synapses are classified into various types, but based on physiological classifications, synapses are classified into chemical and electrical synapses. In chemical synapses, as we can see here in this diagram, the action potential, which is arrived at the neuron terminal of the presynaptic neuron, results in various processes which thereby results in transmission of this potential to the postsynaptic terminal. And this processes involve chemical processes, whereas in electrical synapse, the action potential, which is arrived at the presynaptic terminal, results in opening of gap junctions, thereby exchange of ions and ATP occurs between the post and presynaptic neurons, which results in a coupling potential and thereby getting transmitted to the next neuron. So, let's talk about chemical synapse. Chemical synapse uses a chemical neurotransmitter for the conduction of impulse across the synaptic cleft. The two neurons are not in contact physically. They are typically unidirectional and commonly found in the body. The distance between the presynaptic and postsynaptic cell membranes is 20 to 40 nanometers, which is pretty wide between the neurons. And this distance will be covered by the neurotransmitters, which is released in the presynaptic neuron and reaches the receptor, which is present in the postsynaptic neuron, thereby results in conduction of information. Here we will see the mechanism of how chemical synapse takes place. So as we see here, it is mentioned as steps, and when the action potential arrives the axon terminal, voltage gated calcium channels opens. Once the calcium channels are open, calcium influx occurs where calcium ions enters the presynaptic neurons. These calcium which enter results in a calcium mediated neurotransmitter vesicle information, which causes the vesicles to move towards the membrane. Exocytosis occurs of these neurotransmitters, and the neurotransmitters are released in the synaptic cleft. These neurotransmitters, which were released in the synaptic cleft, gets bind to the receptors present in the postsynaptic neurons and thereby resulting in postsynaptic cell signals. So now let's talk about electrical synapse. Neurons forming electrical synapse have gap junctions or low resistance bridge between them. These are seen in few locations in human nervous system. Like we can find these electrical synapses in retina, olfactory bulb, and hippocampus in humans. In this mode of transmission, the impulse can travel bidirectionally, and the distance between the pre and the postsynaptic cell membrane is 3 to 5 nanometers, which is very less compared to the chemical synapse. Here, the mode of transmission in electrical synapse is quite different from the chemical synapse. In an electrical synapse, the presynaptic and postsynaptic membrane are very close together and are actually physically connected by channel proteins forming gap junctions. These gap junctions allow the current to pass directly from one cell to the next. Like the currents, what we were talking here about are the ion currents, where there occurs an exchange of ions between the presynaptic and postsynaptic neurons. In addition to these ions that carry this current, other molecules such as ATP can also diffuse to these large gap junction pores. So here we can see the presynaptic terminal and the postsynaptic terminal connected by the gap junction channels. So when an action potential reaches here, the gap junction channel opens, resulting in exchange of ions across these two cells, and thereby resulting in transmission of coupling potential in the postsynaptic neuron. So now let's discuss about the difference between the electrical and chemical synapses. Impulse is transmitted through gap junctions or low resistance, whereas in chemical synapses, they use neurotransmitters for impulse transmission. In electrical synapses, the transmission is bidirectional, whereas in chemical synapses, it's unidirectional. Electrical synapses are found in special areas like retina, olfactory bulb, lateral vestibular nucleus, cerebral cortex, hippocampus, etc. Chemical synapses are seen in most of the synaptic junctions in the body. Synaptic cleft get replaced by low resistance bridge in electrical synapse, and synaptic cleft is present in chemical synapse. So the electrical synapse are faster compared to chemical synapse where it is highly slow because of the synaptic delay, which is 0.5 millisecond. Electrical synapses are insensitive to hypoxia and pH changes, whereas chemical synapses are sensitive to hypoxia and pH changes. Electrical synapse does not get fatigue, but chemical synapse has synaptic fatigue. Conduction is of same speed as nerve conduction in the case of electrical synapse, whereas conduction is slower due to synaptic delay in chemical synapse. The transmission is simple, rapid, and efficient, whereas in chemical synapse, since there is complexity in various steps and variety of neurotransmitters, there is a complication which occurs in the chemical synapse and that causes the delay. And these things are help in memory and learning. In electrical synapse, it does not show any synaptic properties, whereas chemical synapse shows synaptic properties. These electrical synapses are mainly found in invertebrates or in lower vertebrates, and chemical synapse is found in higher vertebrates and is more advanced. So, as we discussed, chemical synapses and electrical synapses has their own advantages and disadvantages over each other. These chemical synapses, which is generally found in our body, is more actually because there it can happen the properties of synaptic properties which are amplification, modification. These properties can be exhibited by the chemical synapse, whereas electrical synapse can just transmit the electrical information, action potential, which is received by the presynapse directly to the postsynapse. So, as we conclude, uh, we have electrical and chemical synapses with their own properties which are required in our body. These are the references which I used, and thank you.